Student housing is such a unique industry. The more unique an industry is, the more important it is for that industry to have a resource and a platform to share ideas and data, to determine best practices, and a platform to simply promote networking among the professionals in that industry. That's what we are setting out to provide with Student Housing Insight. But what's even more unique about the student housing industry is how unique those professionals are. They want to make a positive impact on the students and the university communities they serve. They understand they have an opportunity to touch the future. They come to work every day looking for ways to make that future bright. If you're one of those people, come be a part of Student Housing Insight. Well, what's up, everyone, and welcome to ShopTalk for January 16th, 2025. A happy new year to everyone, if I haven't talked to you since last year. Really quick, if I would love to know where folks are watching from, so would love for you guys to put in the chat, number one, that you hear me, because I have a really bad time of hitting the mute button when I'm not supposed to, but also just want to know where you guys are watching from. So let us know what city you're in. Again, this is Shop Talk. We're talking about everything student housing operations, and this is our monthly webinar that we typically do on the second Thursday of each month. And great, see everybody talking in the chat. And I'm going to be your host today, Wesley Dees. I'm the CEO of Student Housing Insight. If you don't know anything about Student Housing Insight, we're a platform for networking and bringing student housing professionals together and sharing data. And we also do a lot of cool events and stuff too. So you can find out more about what we do at studenthousinginsight.com. Well, guys, let's go ahead and get started. A couple of housekeeping things. Again, I mentioned in the chat, we would love for this to be very interactive and make sure that if there's things that you guys want to comment on what the panel is talking about and try to hear from some of your other colleagues, make sure you use the chat for that. You'll find that on the right-hand side of your screen. Also, would love for you to ask any questions for our panelists today. You can do that in the chat as well. Just make sure you put a Q in front of it so I can flag it and be able to bring it up on screen for everybody. Well, this is typically the time we get into policy and legislative updates from NMHC, but both Matthew and Dave are on a plane going back from Colorado, where they were at a big boondoggle that I think everybody probably is aware of. We've got a couple of panelists today that are still in Colorado, so we'll see how the skiing is. So join us next month. We'll have some updates from NMHC. I know a lot of you guys are headed to their members conference here next week, I believe. So I'm sure you'll probably meet up with those guys there as well. Speaking of some other upcoming industry events, we want to make sure that you're aware of and supporting. If you're out in San Diego, or if you're doing any student housing out in San Diego, there's the San Diego Student Housing Summit that is coming up next month, hosted by BizNow. That will be on February 12th, and it is at the University of San Diego. You can find out more information at biznow.com. Also, the big event in student housing, at least here in the U.S., is coming up in April. That's the Interface Student Housing Conference, which will be April 9th through 11th, once again in Austin and at the JW Marriott. Want to make sure everybody's aware, the early bird deadline is next month, February 13th. So make sure to save some extra dollars. And if you're looking at exhibiting at that event, make sure that you get in touch with the folks at Interface. You can find out more information. I think the easiest link is to go to just studenthousingbbusiness.com, and they typically have an ad either in the banner or off to the side. You can also find all of these events at our events page on studenthousinginsight.com as well. So, well, fantastic. We've got a great panel today for our monthly pre-leasing of review of both national and regional data. So let me pull up Charlie as I bring on everybody else. How's it going?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Awesome.
So you're one of our panelists that's out in Colorado. How's the skiing?
It's good. It's cold, which I know everybody feels bad for me about. But yeah, having a good time. I'm actually going to hang around a couple days, so excited to chat through how everything kind of, I guess, ended the year, but it's not really the end of the year because it's student housing and we lease on a different cycle. So a lot of good things to talk about today.
It is different cycles. So I want to just kind of preface before I have everybody introduce themselves. Wanted to make sure that, you know, we've talked for the past 3 or 4 months about everything, you know, as far as tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 and the industry as a whole, but we haven't really given any kind of focus on tier 2 and tier 3. So I wanted to bring on some operators for this panel that have got a pretty strong footprint in those smaller markets. Charlie, I'll let you explain in a minute how you guys categorize those different tiers, but really excited for these guys to be on here. They've got a ton of experience in these markets. And with that being said, I'll hand it off to those guys to introduce themselves really quick. I think we're starting with Steve.
Yep. Hey guys, Steve Mitchell with Asset Living. Glad to be on today. I've been with Asset for about a dozen years, and from our perspective, we have about 110,000 beds under management, spans roughly 250 properties around the country. And when we look at how things are kind of split up, we're about 50% tier 1, 30% tier 2, 20% tier 3, and of course that ebbs and flows based on the portfolio each year, but gives us a really good perspective into what's going on when 50% of our properties are in tier 2 and tier 3.
Chase?
Name is Chase Shelton. I'm the Director of Leasing and Marketing here at Campus Realty Management. We have about 3,500 beds across 5 states, 7 communities, some more in the pipeline, a little diversity between tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, focusing more on tier 2 and tier 3 right now.
All right, Jake.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Jake Dzurino. I'm with Caliber Living. We're a third-party management group, just under 4,000 beds, and primarily in the smaller secondary, tertiary markets in the Southeast. So this webinar kind of fits what we do pretty well. So excited to talk to everybody today.
Well, fantastic. Well, hey, Charlie, I've got your slide deck here ready to go through. Why don't we run through some of these numbers? And I think the last slide that we'll have here will kind of give a little bit more definition to what's happening between tier 2 and 3 and tier 1.
Awesome. Well, excited to give a little update here. If you want to jump to that first slide, we can put things in perspective nationally. 43.6% as of basically the turn of the year. So this is about, give it 12 days, 13 days old, but still, you can see pre-lease nationally behind about 2.3%. The Midwest and the Southeast, down about 1.5. The Midwest is, similarly in line with where they were this time last year. Seeing a little bit of lagging indicators there in the Southwest, kind of your Texas, Arizona markets. And then again, the West Coast normally starts a little later, just the way that those school cycles kind of kick off a little earlier here in the Southeast, Northeast, Midwest, et cetera. So I think this number, when we met at LeaseCon this time last month, was about 3.5% behind. So again, fluctuating a little bit behind, a couple hundred basis points here or there, but generally speaking, still, strong velocity in relation to the last couple of years, which were, banner years from a velocity standpoint. And as we look at rates, if you want to jump to the next one, Wes, you can see here rate growth is just under 5%. The Midwest, again, seeing the largest, rate growth spread. The West, Southwest, relatively flat, give or take. But again, the Southeast, you're seeing pretty strong, about plus or minus 6% there, and almost 10% there on the Midwest side. So still relatively strong. A lot of the development happening here in student housing is more Southeast and I guess Southwest focused. So you're seeing a little bit of that supply impact happening there, but ultimately still strong from a fundamentals perspective, from a national perspective. And as we take a little bit deeper dive into the floor plans and breaking this from a studio to 6-bedroom.
Yeah. By the way, this is the first time there's been really enough data to have this in our slide deck. So.
Yeah, just based on the timing and everything, and the people starting later, et cetera, different timeframes. But you can see a handful behind. Ultimately, the 4 bedrooms are the largest from a standpoint of, I guess, just number of beds perspective. Pretty unique to student housing as opposed to other kind of sectors across multifamily. But generally speaking, the relatively in line, a couple points behind here or there. The studios in the 6 bedrooms, a little bit more unique floor plan types. We're seeing the I guess the lower demand per se, but your more traditional 1, 2, 3, 4s relatively in line from years past. And as we look at how that looks on the rates perspective, you can see there that the studios in the the studios in the 6 bedrooms are not performing the best. From a standpoint of year-over-year rate growth, but ultimately seeing a lot of resurgence there on the 3 bedrooms. And again, if you look at it from a standpoint of, a 2 versus a 3, you're saving almost $300, whatever that would be, $200 per month for having an extra friend. So ultimately seeing a lot more demand there on the 3 bedrooms there, just based on price difference, you can infer there from the 2 bedrooms. So still strong fundamentally. Again, we're not bet, it's not 22, 23 again, but still, I would say in relation to other asset classes or, just conventional multifamily, strong fundamentals there from a supply demand standpoint. And then again, I don't make people do math because math is hard for me, but this is just in context of a bar chart, the same slides that we just reviewed there. So for the purposes of our panel and communication, how we determine Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 is just based on enrollment. So any Tier 1 market is 25,000 total enrollment or more. Tier 2 is between 10 and 24,900, and then Tier 3 is below 10,000. And I know there's a lot of potentially, some Power 5 schools that may be in that Tier 2 bucket based on enrollment. This just makes it easier to kind of cut the data and keep things consistent from a standpoint of categorization. So
let me just kind of, so for something like I'll just kind of take it to my hometown, right? So with, or home, well, I'm in South Carolina. I keep referring to North Carolina as my
your
home
MSA.
state. Anyway,
we'll give you your MSA.
Yeah. So if you're looking at something in Raleigh, of course, NC State's way above 25,000 anyway, but you're taking kind of all of those universities in that market, or are you just going with kind of the main university?
I think it's the primary university is what it's pulling through.
Okay.
So for the most part, if there are multiple in a market, it's going to fall in that categorization of Tier 1. Like if you think about FSU, where you have Tallahassee,
A&M
FSU and FAMU. FAMU would be in that technically Tier 2 because they're around 12,000, but FSU, 45,000 plus. Gotcha. So ultimately,
but a Wake Forest and Winston-Salem
is going to be
in Tier 2,
Tier 3, even though they would be in the ACC if conferences still exist. So
yeah, well, you've got I think on College House you've also got Winston-Salem State on there, but I don't know that still puts them above 25,000.
No, I don't think so. So ultimately, it's the easiest way to do it. I know there's we could go on and on what to include, what not. We're just breaking it down on enrollment. So markets like in my backyard in Atlanta, Kennesaw State would probably be a secondary market because they're not in a major Power 5 conference, but at the same time, they got 40,000 kids there. So we'll put them in the Tier 1 bucket.
Gotcha. So break these columns down for us and kind of what you've seen here.
Yes. So looking at the average enrollment growth across those markets, you can see here that Tier 1s, as we've been talking about for years now, continue to see the lion's share of growth. The Tier 2 is relatively flat, give or take, plus or minus a basis point here or there. And the Tier 3s is really where we're seeing some of those enrollment cliffs happening. Don't believe all the headlines, but at the same time, the larger universities continue to grow, whereas some of your smaller I guess, not as prominent universities are seeing a relative decline. And then the number of markets broken out here, about 271. And then, from a pre-leasing perspective, again, the tier 1 markets have a lot more assets, I guess, than your tier 2, tier 3, just based on, the demand there from a student perspective. So you're seeing 45.8%, that's above the national average. Whereas, your tier 2, tier 3s are lagging behind. And obviously, rates are relative, given the fact that, $50 over $750 holds a lot more weight than $50 over 1055. So generally speaking, you're seeing still strong fundamentals, tier 2 and tier 1, probably much more favorable. I'd say the lion's share of investment is happening in those two. And then the tier 3s, right? The 69 markets that we're covering across the platform, still relatively strong. Still seeing some positive, more normalized rent growth numbers. But, ultimately, I'd say for every capital group that says, hey, we invest in tier 1 Power 5 markets, there's still another 170 that are out there that are still relevant in the student housing world. So be interesting to kind of chat and hear, the boots on the ground perspective from Chase, Jake, and Steven about these, and get things kicked off.
Yeah. So, looking at the enrollment growth in tier 2 and tier 3, obviously tier 2 is very flat. Tier 3, a little bit of a decline. But then you go over to the year-over-year pre-lease growth as far as velocity and pre-leasing. That's very flat in both of them. Glad to see the rate change. We'll get into that. But kind of first question I had for you guys is, is there are there any, because everything's kind of looking flat, as far as the data is concerned, but for you guys, is there, one or two markets within tier 2 and tier 3 that you're seeing either a larger or smaller than expected year-over-year pre-lease of velocity? And, is there something that you and your teams are attributing that to?
Yeah, I mean, I could speak on, we have property overlook in Nacogdoches, Texas, with Stephen F. Austin. Technically, it's a tertiary market, it's a tier 3 market. We noticed that enrollment at SFA has kind of declined over the past probably 4 years, more so almost by 4%. They are seeing an increase, though, with competitive class schedules and also competitive bringing in more people. But our pre-leasing is a little behind from prior year, as well as the market's a little behind from prior year. So we are noticing some stuff in the Southeast region that is tracking behind last year.
I'd go the other way. There's a couple markets that we really like that have there are some new developments that one of our clients has put in there based on their enrollment growth and the university's strategic plans they put together. Two, we were like Mobile, Alabama, and Jacksonville, Alabama, would both be in the tertiary category. Jacksonville is a great story. They have, put a lot of good people in the right place, I guess, at the university, and they really have plans to grow, and they're coming through with that. We're at like 45% pre-leased today. This time last year was the first year we were at like just under 20, I think. So Jacksonville is definitely one like that. But these tertiary markets always seem to go like there's so much difference between one and the other, just really based on the university and what they're going to do and what they decide to do. It's kind of something we were chatting about before this call as well. So those are two I really like on the positive upside.
Yeah, and I'd say for us on assets portfolio, it's interesting. Tier 2 and tier 3, we have a couple of markets that are a little bit behind, and we have a couple of markets, Texas State being one of those, where our portfolio in particular is fairly good sized, and it's a real mixed bag. We have a number of assets that are well ahead year over year, and a handful of assets that are behind year over year. I think some of that's pricing strategy, location, student wants and desires this year differently from next year. We all know from an industry standpoint, you can be the place to live one year and something changes, and now you can still be the shiny penny, but nobody wants to live where you are until the end of the leasing cycle. But kind of aggregating everything together, our tier 3 properties are about 5.5 points ahead year over year, kind of collectively. rate growth. I know that wasn't one of your questions, but we're about 3% rate growth. So we're beating what you had on your prior table in terms of averages for the overall tier 3 markets. Substantially lower, I would say, year over year growth on rates than it was the prior year, of course. But I think we're chasing occupancy a little bit this year after we all chased rate the last two, and kind of playing through the fact that we're mitigating some of that slowness and enrollment growth and other headwinds that you talked about already today, Wes. But I will say, to just say one property that at least market that I thought was interesting, Cal Poly is screaming ahead year over year. And I didn't pull down the exact figures, but I looked at 3 or 4 of the deals there, and they're 100, 150 leases ahead of where they were this time last year on some of those assets.
How much PBSH is actually in that market? You know?
Is that slow?
Yeah, slow. I mean, it's not a huge
It's
amount.
like four or 5 assets.
Yeah.
A couple just traded too. But that's one where big, prominent university, but the city's so anti-development that, a tick up in enrollment, which I think they've seen at Cal Poly, again, builds that supply demand curve. I've seen that too. That's one. And Stephen, it's and the reason why I bring this up, it's Stephenville. Another one that is, I think we did like kind of, hey, which market? I think they were like 30% ahead last year.
Yeah.
And five deals in the market, everybody, everything filled up like almost immediately.
Yeah. It for the white hair on my head and the years in the space, there's some of those markets where, Wes, I think you probably feel the same way, as we know the names for a couple of decades. We go, oh, that market can't be good. And then I look at Georgia Southern this year. I'm like, man, 15 years ago, I would have never thought that would be a long-term market where you'd want to be. And for the last 2 years, they've been screaming as well.
Yeah. New development going in there as well this year. So anything on those markets? I mean, Cal Poly, I kind of get. I mean, we've had this recurring theme for the past year on the podcast about how much of a housing crunch or crisis there is specifically for students in California. So, I get that, but are there going to like the Stephenville example that Charlie gave? Is there anything that you guys are pointing to as it relates to university enrollment? I know, we've had a couple of markets that we've seen some conversions, from PBSH to multifamily, which is, obviously answered the call for some more affordable housing on the conventional side in those markets, and then it's pushed those students into the remaining PBSH properties. Are you guys tracking some of that in your markets as well?
I would say I was a regional about a year and a half, 2 years ago at Stephenville. We had the edge over there, and I do know that the university's expansion, I think they went up 6 to 8% in enrollment, and they only have 4 or 5 assets, like Charlie mentioned. And the university is now closing down some dorms for remodeling, which did push a lot of drive off campus because they're remodeling their spaces, as well as expanding their graduate student housing on campus. But for us here at Campus Realty, the Edge in Pensacola, Florida, University of West Florida, it was a dragging ball to get pre-leased up to where we went at last year. And this year we're ahead of the market and ahead of last year substantially. And that's because they had a record year increase of 5% of enrollment. I think it's their highest increase in almost 56 years. But they're driving with a lot more new programs at University of West Florida and Pensacola.
I think it's also, new developments too, right? Daytona's coming to mind, one of our markets. And that one for the past few years has, really taken off. We broke records on pre-lease velocity there in the past 2 years. And there is a new development going on this year. So, it's the same metrics that we would track in a tier 1 market. It's the same things that affect it. It's just, it takes like one deal to really wreck the market, and really change it. So This one, fortunately, not so much that way. But I think just kind of on that note too, the university enrollment, obviously super important. But a lot of these like new developments can come in. There's a lot of times maybe, I don't know, less sophisticated sometimes shops that are development companies and such that are putting these things in. And so the market can really be great. And then it can just get pulled out from under you really quickly. And we've kind of seen that happen over the years as well. So more supply, obviously going to affect demand.
So from our vantage, given the fact that we have multiple platforms, it's kind of interesting because we have a couple of deals that started as student PBSH West that are now going through the conversion to conventional. One of those at Georgia Southern, one in Greeley. And it is interesting, especially a market like Greeley that's seen some downward pressure over the last 2 or 3 years, to suddenly take out what was the old Verge deal, Campus Crest deal there is going to go multi. Don't quote me. That's, a few hundred beds. I should have that off the top of my head. It's probably 400 beds. But a market like Greeley, removing 400 beds over the next 2 cycles likely restabilizes that entire market without any other changes there, so long as someone else can show up and build the deal.
It really made me, Charlie mentioned earlier Atlanta and Kennesaw markets, and it kind of, obviously, as we know, Kennesaw and Atlanta markets technically are tier 1 based off of enrollment. But Charlie mentioned, multiple universities. So like in Georgia, you have, Tech, which is obviously 53, 54 enrollment now. But then you have all the AUCs, and you have Morehouse College that just came back online. You have a lot of tertiary prospects that are price conscious comparatively to a market in Atlanta that's price driven. So Atlanta market has really shifted drastically over the past 2 years. And specifically this year, it's pulling teeth to look for new leases. Retention obviously matters, but you're starting to see marketing trends of tertiary and secondary at Atlanta. That's a tier 1. And then same thing with Kennesaw. I think Kennesaw and San Marcos markets are very similar in the fact that they're technically tier 1, but they give secondary markets because they're located so close to big cities and big universities like Atlanta and Austin. Yeah. So we're seeing real big trends when it comes to pre-leasing based off of marketing shifts alone.
And let me ask you guys, switch over a little bit more to the operations and tactics, but it's interesting you bring that up. And, most of these tier 3 markets and where you've got those, let's call them tier 3 institutions that are in bigger markets like that. There's a huge reliance on financial aid, and of course financial aid disbursement before operators get rent paid. But typically they get they pay the whole semester up front. A couple of things, chatter wise that I've heard since LeaseCon was that, and they don't know if it was because of the delays with FAFSA or whatever, but those distributions seem to have been really late this past fall, and we're just now getting into spring semester. Are you guys tracking that at all, or noticing the difference?
Yeah, I'll go first. We got the let's call it the largest exposure in some regards, and I checked in with Stacy Lakoki and some others before we jumped on the phone this week, and interestingly enough, we've got a couple of properties even last year that did suffer a little bit from delayed funding, but those were primarily West Coast schools, and it didn't really, at least for us, it didn't impact payments. It didn't impact leasing in a meaningful way in really any of the secondary or tertiary markets, which I, frankly, not being in operations, was a little bit surprised by, but maybe our experience is just unique.
I'd echo that. There's nothing in our numbers for any of our properties that would make you think that there's something like that going on. The only thing I can recall there would be last year, where it just seemed like the velocity cycle was delayed. If there's like a university that usually we see a lot of leases come through, like February, for instance.
Nothing on rent collection this past fall.
Yeah, no.
A little delay in the fall. I'd feel more so than the spring. So far, most of ours are already released or being released this next week. So I would say spring has been tenfold better than fall. I would say for Georgia Tech specifically, for the AUC schools in Atlanta, for Texas State slightly by 2 weeks. There was a little bit slag, but I think that was just because the FAFSA issue.
Yeah. Hey, I went back into the, I don't know if it's going to add it. Hold on a second. There we go. I went back into the vault since we've now been doing ShopTalk since April of 22. And so April of 23, we were doing an episode, focused on tier 2 and tier 3 and had a very similar chart that College House put together. And I'll just do the math because this, if you think about it, because this is year over year. So a lot of this is actually going back to, April or March of 2022. And when you're talking about enrollment specifically, you're talking about enrollment starting fall of 21. So again, do the math here really quick. Average enrollment in tier 1, it's going up 2,300 students. Again, that's on average. Rent has gone up 21.96%. Tier 2, you're talking about enrollment going down an average of 200 students at those institutions, and a 12.8% increase in average rent. And my question to you guys is, do you think we'll continue to see rent increases in these tier 2 markets? I didn't put tier 3 because there wasn't enough there to really talk about. But in these tier 2 markets this leasing season, or will those rates stay steady and leading until move in, and we won't see rent go up much there? What say you, gentlemen?
I think across our portfolio, we're seeing healthy rent growth in our pre-lease. I mean, we're probably, there's some properties that are looking at a 9 or 10% increase. Some of that's obviously just kind of a fluke to that property in that market. But overall, we're calling for like 6% increases come this fall. So pretty healthy.
Very similar to what Jake said as well. I think that mostly though with us being owner operated, we're able to kind of take a grasp on the market surveys and kind of look at the data and see what's coming in and kind of jump that gun a little more. I would say there's some markets that are surpassing better than others. As we're all aware, different parts of the state. Kennesaw versus Atlanta, you're seeing huge trends in Kennesaw with healthy rate increases, healthy occupancy, healthy pre-leasing, and then not so much so in Atlanta. 20 minutes away, but very different tactics, very different clientele that you're marketing to as well. Yeah. So I think overall, yes, but I also think that the audience, as we discussed privately, are becoming more price conscious and smart about how they're pre-leasing. I think there was a comment made that, some of us have been in this industry a while and some of us have friends that have known us for a very long time and their kids are getting into college now. And I think it's coming better knowledge of what student housing is and how they can technically manipulate the trends of the pricing.
Steven, that's a perfect handoff to you, by the way.
Yeah, the old guy. I know. I think I will say, admittedly, the way we kind of tier our properties internally is probably a bit more like just by the beds, like Charlie does, which isn't an issue. It's just I think we got a little bit of bleed over when I start to share some of the statistics. I think some of my tier 2 might be 3 might be 2, just based on sizes, or really not on sizes, but market dynamics. Nonetheless, I do think we're going to continue to see rate growth through the remainder of the leasing cycle. We're plus 3%. I know that's like the fall 2 number that we all say when we're doing well, but don't want to say how well we're doing or we're doing bad. But we're 2.9 to 3.9%, depending on just averages across 60 markets of tier 2 and tier 3. And of course, some lower than that, substantially higher than that. If I were a betting person, which Charlie knows I am not, because every time I do, he forces me to do something like take a shot somewhere in Vegas, which is not my thing. I think we probably end up, plus or minus 4% on our portfolio of growth when it's all said and done. But the biggest thing we're going to see this year is some of the markets that had a little bit added pressure on occupancy or vacancy last year, those properties are going to restabilize in my mind, because we weren't quite as aggressive this year out of the gates. And so our stair steps are a little bit slower. It feels a little bit more linear than it has maybe in the 2 years prior.
I agree. I think what's really interesting is that we're not really seeing necessarily, I know the data showed a little decrease in enrollment, maybe at those tier 2 and 3 universities, but overall, kids are going to college. Kids are going to higher their education in the US, which has been great to see. There's not a slowdown there. But I do think that there's a slowdown in the options of what student housing is. We're developing quickly nationally. Our Midwest regions, we have Bloomington, Indiana, which, as anybody knows, Bloomington, Indiana is one of the most harshest, weirdest markets to ever lease in. And, we're surpassing, I think last year alone, it was 17 to 21% increase in rates. And this year we're already 8 or 9, and we're ahead of last year and ahead of the market tremendously.
Okay. So that's the data. I want to talk a little bit about marketing, and let's put our marketing hats on for a little bit. Historically, when it comes to, because of the reasons Charlie and I were discussing earlier about, especially tier 2 and tier 3, there's a lot of things there that are very similar when it comes to marketing. So I really just want to compare those markets with tier 3, because historically, SEO has not been a big spend for tier 3. I mean, we've got markets where there's 4 or 5 properties, and there's just no reason to do it. Everybody knows, which PBSH operators are in town, right? And kind of the same thing with social media spend, although social media engagement and online reputation are, huge and very laborious, I guess is the best way of putting it. And so I wanted to ask you guys this question. Are you guys managing social media engagement and online reputation in these small, or how are you guys doing it in these smaller markets? Is this something that you are centralizing, or is the site staff directly involved with managing those?
Definitely. I'll go first, I guess. Definitely not centralizing. I mean, we give like a centralized guidance on this, but for social media, in my opinion, to work well, you've got to have the sites engaged, because they're literally part of the brand and part of the property. So to your point, they're running it, and it's probably the second most significant piece of the kind of marketing puzzle that we put together for these markets.
Do you want to go, Steven?
Sure. I think so. First, we do tend, there's a couple of things. We definitely spend, I'd say, a bit more meaningfully, believe it or not, Wes, in tier 2 and tier 3 on digital. And because you may not need it. Well, let me rephrase. There's 4 or 5 properties, but in a market where it's competitive, maybe you have to engage a little bit more. Therefore, we're spending a little bit more in that regard. Whereas in a tier 1, going with a heavy social campaign, while certainly necessary, if you're in Austin, for example, the cost to buy those clicks and words and campaigns sometimes are a bit more punitive than they are valuable. And so I think we have a skew over our overall spend that digital tends to be a little bit heavier, which is contrarian to think about, but in those tier 2 and tier 3 markets. Now, you didn't ask this question, but I'll jump into the idea of what do we do differently, because I think it just naturally extends in. One of the things and I'm curious about Jake and Chase's exposure on this side too, but we would never in a tier 1 market go and knock on a university's door and ask if we could spend dollars with their football team. But in a tier 2 or tier 3, if there's a pretty good background and there's support, maybe Western Georgia or Georgia Southern, just we'll keep it Southeast, you may be willing to spend a little bit more to get that type of exposure there that wouldn't really be a bang for your buck in one market. So I think for some people, both of those views might be a little bit contrarian.
I mean, I'll get back to your question, Wes, in a second, but with Stevens, Yes, when I started in this industry, I started at Park West and at Texas A&M University. We partnered. We had tons of dollars to spend. Obviously, it's a new development, and we partnered with the university athletics. They still have that contract to this day, housing the athletes, and so we did do that. But that was just because of the vicinity to the location is where it was pretty much. We were across the street from everything. Same thing with Oregon. I partnered with the University of Oregon a lot with Thurgood and Olive back in the day with the holding the athletes. It's a double-edged sword there. You get the exposure, you get the great clientele, but you have the horrible turn and all that other stuff. But kind of, if you want to answer it, I'll go back to Wes's question, Jake, if you want to put your part in.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I could just echo what you said. We've done it and we've gone down that road so many times before. I think there's there might only be one property, I want to say, since last year where we've kept an athletic sponsorship. It just, to your point, it ends up costing a lot of money, and it never ends up really bringing stuff through in the way that we want. I would rather lease it up kind of the old-fashioned way, and our way on our lease terms, and we're more in control of rent growth there. And it's a significant piece of the marketing budget that a lot of times these properties in these markets just don't have. So you've got to make it all go further that way too.
Agreed. Yeah.
My issue with the sports contracts, and just get on a soapbox here for a second, is
don't talk about Milledgeville, Wes.
I'm not going to talk about Milledgeville, but I'm going to talk about no, I'm not going to talk about Milledgeville. But a lot of these tier 3 schools will, hire some of the same sports management companies that are at the tier 1s, and the tier 1 and those sports management companies act like these tier 3s are as valuable.
You're paying the same price.
Well, also the process on those, right, is just keep telling them no, and then miraculously the price keeps coming down significantly.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and so for clarification, I am not a proponent that says in every one of these markets you should. Right. I'm just saying that it's worth an evaluation year to year as opposed to a larger tier school. The cost may be just so prohibitive that we would never recommend that.
I mean, 100% agree. I think going back to Wes's question, we don't centralize our social media or marketing efforts, like Jake both said, to putting them on site. I think what I mentioned earlier was authenticity. This generation, I told y'all before, this is not like any other generation we've dealt with before. This generation, they're coming into college after 4 years of being in COVID high school. They got into high school with COVID, so they're coming out and they're ready to sadly party and enjoy college and enjoy adult life, which is great on our end because they're going to come to student housing. But at the same time, this generation doesn't have that brand identity that the early Y2Ks or the 90s or the 80s kids had. This generation thrives off of building off of other complexes to that extent. So the marketing is so much more fun now. It's more direct. It's more grassroots driven. So I really feel like this student housing starting this year and this coming for the next 4 years is going to be very interesting and seeing where marketing shifts, especially with social media.
All right, so I guess I owe an answer too. I skipped over it. I didn't mean to. Yes, echo everybody else. Definitely a responsibility at the site level. I will say we benefit from kind of the scale and scope of the platform, and therefore we have a pretty good sized marketing team internally too, from a corporate standpoint. And so that engagement, that management of those programs, it's kind of a yin and yang between some of those corporate resources that we have allocated out to work in connection with the on-site teams, but ultimately the on-site teams are responsible for really kind of driving it.
Gotcha. Hey, we've got a couple of questions from the audience, so I want to bring those up really quick. So Justin Ferris, Justin, I hope you're doing well. How often are your teams conducting physical outreach, if at all, specifically in tier 2 markets?
As
you guys are kind of talking about that, but
as often as you can. As often as you can. You have to understand, like we mentioned earlier, price consciousness is coming to mind when it comes to tier 2 and tier 3. So with tier 2, luckily it's mid-size, so you can really highlight your affordability, but also your location, your proximity. So highlighting that through social media, but also getting on, you can kind of mix it together, do your walk to class, social media, but also be on campus and promoting that. It's as often as you can, at least 3 times a week right now.
Same. Yeah. Our goal is as often as you can. We have lead goals for our outreach. as opposed to number of times, but 3 times is what we look for per week.
Yeah, you're not going to get any different sentiment out of me. I think the more engagement, the better, as long as you have a team in place that can handle it.
All right, I've got another one here from Ray Jones. We have markets that are not pushed by specials. Seeing the students are not much interested in them anymore. How are your markets doing with this? Are you more special focused, giveaways, rate reduction, etc.? If you are seeing the same as us, how are you overcoming it?
Are you in the Atlanta market, Ray? First question. For me, I love, there's been years as regionals, as on-site, as everything, I've done no concessions at all at facilities. And that's like the best thing to walk away from and be like, I don't have to send another document to be countersigned and spend more money of a marketing budget. But right now, I don't think that they're not special focused. I think that they're well-trained, as we discussed. These people are well-trained on these market trends and how they work. They know if I don't sign a lease, I give it 30 days, they're going to drop something, whether it be a special, a rate, a free parking, a something. And so sadly, there's not, in my opinion, much to overcome it besides flow with it this year and see how this year really goes, because last year was the first year I feel like I saw that happening. Again, these kids got to be at home 24/7 on their phones. And so they have TikTok now, and it shows you, hey, I had a bad experience living at this place. And so I'm going to start digging more and doing more information and due diligence. And we're also being more open and transparent about it online. And so it's just, there's not that well overcoming it, in my opinion. It's just fighting it.
Yeah, I agree. My colleagues that are on this call are probably going to laugh when I say this, but I'm not a fan of specials. I just think they make the whole sales pitch more complicated a lot of times and don't really actually push any change. But if we do them, and I think this is coming from Chase's point, the market's changing, the kind of demographic is changing. You can't buy people with a gift card anymore or anything like that. But what we will do is look at more specific like floor plans at that property and incentivize more directly that way. Basically on a deadline basis to try to do groups. That's about as far as we'll go, like sign with 4 people and kind of, get this rate versus that rate. But it's already built into our rate tier structure. It's not like we're giving money away or gift cards. I don't ever really see it actually do anything.
Charlie, I know obviously you guys don't track specials, but I know you get asked a lot about, hey, do you know what they're doing in this market?
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious, has that slowed down? Because I agree with these guys. I feel like the special things is it's not getting the kind of traction it used to. Are you kind of hearing that as well?
Yeah, like I will say over the last 24 months, really, it hasn't been, I haven't seen as many of, the gift cards and like the, traditional giveaways, AirPods, et cetera. A lot of it's been rate. And I feel like, in the discussions, it's, cool, a $500 gift card's great, but take the $40 a month off my rent. So I've seen that be more the way that the market's moving versus, any sort of things around that. And ultimately, if the velocity is not there, you see it's a race to the bottom. Ultimately that's what student housing is. It's the demands there, you don't have to do it. And if the demand's not there, like you got to pull some lever in. I've seen it, this is year 5 now, but over the last 24 months, it hasn't really been, hey, here's this gift card or whatnot. It's really a rate change in a downward way. And I think that's what's resonating with the students, and ultimately in a lot of these markets, depending on, the need, like, I've seen things drop $200 a month, where that previously probably would have been a $2,000 gift card, which is like, in Jake's perspective, complicated, but ultimately you're solving the same thing and making it easier on both tenant and property. So that's been one of the key things that I've seen.
Yeah, the shift in also utility chargebacks and like how student housing is trending too. There's been a lot. 2017, 16, 18, that was all utilities included. Come live here. And then now we're charging back, water, electricity, doing utility packages, doing this and that. So kind of seeing a difference is big there.
Gotcha. Ray says, thank you. And we've got another follow-up question on the physical outreach from, I was going to say Nikki at first. I don't know why, because I'm too far from my screen, but Nikhil. When you say physical outreach, what is the best way to approach, and what has worked with this generation, given them more involved online?
I like this question. And I know Chase is going to go wild on this one too. The one that we had a lot of fun with was like just going on campus with mini mics, and it's the perfect like kind of get.
You're talking about the candy, not the.
No,
like a little mini microphone.
Oh, a mini micro. Okay.
Yeah, you
all
just
right,
like, pull
gotcha,
them and ask them questions, and we put them on their, our Instagram, and our outreach is always focused on ROI and getting a lead for every interaction we have. So whatever we're giving, we expect to get a quantifiable lead or name, contact, whatever it may be in return. But yeah, it's about engagement and making it fun, right? So that was one of my favorite ones that the sites did that really took off. In recent past, it just kind of was a little bit different, but those things changed almost weekly.
Yeah, I think TikTok really shifted everybody. TikTok changed all the way we market and how we market to different people. Specifically,
all right, you brought it up. Let's go ahead and talk about it. Is it going away? What's happening?
I don't think it's going away. I think we have at least another 270 days is what it's sounding like. They never voted for it. So it's sounding like it's going to stay around for another 270. We'll find out. Technically, it's supposed to shut down on January 10th, but we're here still to the 19th. But TikTok really changed it, like, they were saying, Jake said, but everybody's an influencer now. We don't have to go pay a company to go be an influencer. We don't have to go pay a company to do that anymore, because anybody and everybody can be an influencer in a sense. What we have found out, specifically a lot of our communities, is bringing back the yard games, making something that's interactive with them. We have the bounce balls, we have the big pong cup, making it interactive for the guest card and having fun with it is more fun to these people than just saying, hi, my name is Chase, I sell a product, please sign guest card so I can get paid. So at the end of the day, it's making it more interactive, making it more fun for them. They love the clout, they love the FaceTime, they love the screen time. Give it to them, let them eat it up.
So I've got one last question that I had that kind of follows with what they were asking, but a little bit different. Are there events, tactics, or expenses in your marketing plans for tier 1 that you just don't even bother putting in tier 3 marketing plans?
I would say my biggest expenses is going to sound really stupid. I think that all marketing is equal when it comes to all tiers, because if it doesn't work in one, it's going to work in another. But my biggest expense difference that I don't do at tier 3 versus tier 1 is housing fair and community events in that sense. Because I will spend dollars at Bloomington or Texas State, but I'm not going to spend that at Austin P or at Stephen F. Austin, because it's just not needed, or they don't even have a housing.
Or they don't have them. Yeah.
Or they don't have.
Sure.
So to me, making everything, I would rather spend more money into making what we're doing at Campus Realty is kind of going to the more digital side, not necessarily in the sense of ad spend and ad pay, but in the sense of making everything more mobile friendly, because nobody really gets on a computer anymore unless you're in class or at work. It's tablet or phone. So making sure your website's compatible, making sure your social media content flows and looks good, pushing the more mobile friendly items is for what we're doing here.
Gotcha. Anybody else?
You guys said it all. Like there's nothing more to add.
I was going to say, Steven, come on.
No, I mean, Chase is really kind of dead on, right? It's we all have enough experience where we know we could perhaps unilaterally say, this is not going to work in this market. We also know that in any given year, what hasn't worked the prior 2 years is going to work that year. And so the biggest thing is just being malleable and making sure that you have the spend that you have in mind to go and capture those leases, and just tracking it every single week and sometimes sooner, depending on the tightness of the market, and pivoting that strategy so that you maximize your ROI.
Yeah. And also on that, I liked what Steven said earlier too, with Wes, with the SEO, like we do, we have Google ad spend in every single market we're in except for one. And that's because it's the only one there. It just makes sense. But that's a crucial part, even in these smaller markets. And you really
Google ad, I'll agree with. SEO, I don't necessarily agree with it, but anyway, that's just my experience.
But I also think there's a huge difference. This past 9 months, I've been really digging into it a lot. I think we've all really shifted from targeting ads or two targeting ads, because we were all stationaried on our geolocation ads of around our community and around these 5 properties, instead of targeting these specific locations with these ad spins and these SEO spin. So I think that shifting that a lot has been what's helping us, especially with SEO, and trying to compete with the other comps in the market, because they change it up all the time, let's be honest.
Well, guys, this has been a fantastic session. I appreciate it so much. Again, if folks out there have more questions for these guys, I would say definitely connect with them on LinkedIn and or connect with them through email. You can find most of these guys on their company website. So, yeah. Any other parting thoughts? I feel like we're going to hear something from Charlie, or somebody should say something to Charlie about Georgia not being.
Oh,
Oh, that's just cruel. I mean, come on.
yeah, Charlie can't hear anymore. It must be it's the wind in the background.
I love how he turned on his microphone off. So
Yeah, I saw.
You guys are great. Thank you. Love you all. We're friends before. Nice blazer, Steven.
Thanks.
No, this is awesome, guys. Thanks for making the time. Wes, as always, I know you put a lot of effort into this, so always a pleasure. They're kicking me out of my hotel room, so I got to jump, but we'll see you next time.
Well, fantastic. Well, guys, let's close this thing up and put a bow on it. Our next one is going to be on Thursday, February 13th. Again, we try to do this on the second Thursday of each month. And so we'll be doing that on February 13th, which is also just another reminder, the deadline for the early bird pricing for interface student housing in Austin that's coming up in April. And if you've gotten any value out of today's Shop Talk or with the Student Housing Insight platform, ask you that you please share Shop Talk with your colleagues. They can go and register to receive updates each month, where we will email the link to you guys on God, my mind just went blank. The calendar link is what I was trying to think of. Each month, so you can register for that. So again, shoptalk.info is where they can do that. Guys, again, thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
Thanks,
Wes.
Thanks, guys.